now. Ha! I think we're
Yep, it's going. We got the notification.
Woohoo! Okay. Yay. So we got a double lesson here, and we'll take a break after the first one. It is not perfect by any means. This has been sort of a weird week for us over here as well. So we'll see how this goes. But our next work of art was created by one Horatio Greenough, and not quite certain of the pronunciation. It may be Greenough, but I don't think anybody's going to hang you up on this. Born around 1805, died at 1852. He's only 47 years of age when he passed away. Died of a fever. Didn't really say what kind of a fever. He attended Unitarian Church in Jamaica Plain, demonstrated early interest in sculpture, made a chalk statue of William Penn at the age of 12. Now, William Penn figures back, we've mentioned him 3 or 4 times, if you recall. He's the one that made a deal with the Indians for purchasing what we now know as Pennsylvania, one of the original Quaker founders of that region. And we've had artists depict him, we've had sculptors depict him, and we've mentioned that multiple times. And again, if you do chat every now and then, I'm not going to be able to follow the chat. So if you have a question, you can actually beep in and you can actually say something verbal, and that would be fine. Lots of time for give and take here today. Anyway, Horatio began art training by copying plaster casts of classical Greek sculpture at the Boston Athenaeum. And he learned to model with clay from Solomon Willard. And again, if you think all these names are or are not important, anything that academic decathlon teams, academic decathlon that are in the resource guides, anything that they specifically write is absolutely subject to being questioned. And all these names of these people that you probably only hear this one time, like Solomon Willard, they could ask you a question. Who did Horatio Greenough learn how to model clay from? Okay, so there you go. He learned to carve marble from Alpheus Carey, and he studied at the Phillips Academy in Andover, Massachusetts. Finally enrolled at Harvard in 1821. So he would have been, what, 16 years old? I mean, that's pretty amazing. 16 years old, going to Harvard. There he met Washington Allston, who was a painter. Allston became a friend and mentor who encouraged Greenough in classical sculpture. And there we go. And there's supposed to be an image here, and for some reason it wasn't coming out. I was trying to fix it, and I just figured, well, I'll have to get it later. It wasn't going to be important. It was going to be of the Duomo in Florence, Italy, simply because that's one of the places Horatio went to. Anyway, trying to make it more visually interesting, but there you go. Anyway, he graduated from Harvard and traveled to Italy and became friends with other Americans traveling abroad. Specifically, the resource guide mentions James Fenimore Cooper. He was a writer and a painter, Robert W. Weir. Now, I'm old enough that I grew up reading several of Cooper's works, and most of you, I would think, are not old enough to have done that. You might have heard of some of the things he's written. So I highly encourage you that you're not going to get tested on anything that he's written, but I have read Last of the Mohicans and things like that. So he was a popular adventure writer. At least when I was young, I was reading my father's books, so maybe it's more his time. Anyway, Greenough became the first American sculptor to live and train in Florence. Hence, I was going to put up a picture of Florence, Italy here. He maintained his Florence studio until 1851. Now, remember, he died in 1852, so almost to the end of his life. Earlier generation painters like Benjamin West and John Singleton Copley, they traveled to England, and that's where they set up shop. Remember, nobody's staying home in the colonies or in the newly formed United States. In Greenough's case, newly formed United States. Again, there's no training for artists. in the United States, not until about the mid 1800s. It wasn't until the 19th century American artists went to Italy. So first they're going to England, and now in the 1840s, 1850s, they go to Italy. And so Greenough, first American sculptor to live and train in Florence, and he studied with the Italian sculptor Lorenzo Bartolini while in Florence. Just Lorenzo Bartolini. He was also mentored by Danish sculptor Albert Bertel Thorvaldsen while in Rome. So even though this guy was Danish, he would happen to be traveling in Rome. I went down a little bit of a rabbit hole learning about Thorvaldsen because the name is so cool, but you're not going to get tested on that. So there you go. So far, some of the names we mentioned that he studied under or with: learned how to model from clay from Solomon Willard, carved marble from Alpheus Carey, studied at Phillips Academy, went to Harvard, met Washington Allston, friend and mentor, met famous writer and painter Cooper and Weir, and then he goes to Florence and studies with Lorenzo Bartolini and Albert Bertel Thorvaldsen. A lot of names, and USAID loves to throw these names at you. Find some way to help you remember those names. He winds up, Horatio, publishing a book titled The Travels, Observations, and Experiences of a Yankee Stonecutter. His writings on architecture in this book were highly influential to many people who came later, and it anticipated the tenets of modern architecture like functionalism. Functionalism, basically the definition in the back of the art resource guide is good glossary. It's basically saying that form follows function, that it's an art period where it's like, well, you shouldn't build something unless it has a true function. The exact definition: the principle that buildings should be designed based entirely on their function. So now we're getting to what he created that we're going to be studying and what influenced its creation. So Congress of the United States of America, we're now the United States, because 1800s, Congress commissioned Greenough to create a sculpture of George Washington for the US Capitol. We studied the US Capitol building in the last lecture. In 1832, they commissioned for him to do this. It's in honor of the centennial anniversary of George Washington's birth. He was born in 1732, George Washington, first president. This is the first major federal government art commission. First ever, $20,000. $20,000 back in 1832, that's a hefty sum of money. Hefty sum of money. That's a lot of money. Greenough's sculpture fully embraced the neoclassical style, which this entire section that we've been doing on architecture and statuary, all based on neoclassical style. Washington's pose, and here he is over here, Washington's pose was based on the ancient Greek statue of Zeus at Olympia by the sculptor Phidias. Phidias. I always mispronounce his name, and I've said it multiple times. Not the first time we brought this guy up. You know you're important when you go by one name, right? Cher, Prince, Phidias. There you go. I don't think anybody's ever mentioned those three names in one. Madonna. See, we could, anyway. Here is Zeus, a nice up close image of that. This is simply a painting of what they believe the statue of Zeus looked like, because it doesn't exist today. But you can see the immensity of it in scale. You know, here are Greeks, you know, approximately, you know, probably 5'10" to 6 feet tall, and this enormous statue of Zeus. We're going to come back to this. Notice sitting with his right arm outstretched, holding a statue, his left arm up, raised, right, kind of curled up. His left leg, remember, it looks right to us, but it's his left leg sticking out, with his left foot sticking out, almost as if he's going, he could step on that foot and get up out of this throne there. We're going to come back to this idea of stepping up and out of the throne. It's showing almost the idea of movement, that he could move next. So similar posing, instead of the left arm of Zeus being up and the right arm being out, Washington's right arm is up and the left arm out. The left foot is sticking out, just like Zeus' left foot, with the toga around his lap. We're going to come back more to the details here, but you can see how there are similarities in the image of Zeus and the image of Washington here. So again, Washington's pose based on the ancient Greek statue of Zeus at Olympia by Phidias. So Washington and Zeus are both depicted enthroned in frontal position with one arm bent and raised, different arms in each case, and the other arm extended towards the viewer if you're looking at it from the front. Left foot extended forward as if the figure might rise from the throne and step forward at any moment. The gigantic classical sculpture of Zeus, erected inside the temple of Zeus around 435 BC. So we're talking about this one here, okay? One of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, nearly 41 feet tall, which makes sense with the depiction here, right? If you imagine these people are a little bit less than 6 feet, and you multiply that by 7, he's about 7 people high, makes sense. Nearly 41 feet tall, covered in ivory and gold with a wooden substructure. The sculpture and temple were destroyed around 525 BC. So it'd be 10 years after it was created. We know it once existed because it's represented on coins, and there are written descriptions of this giant statue of Zeus in the Temple of Zeus. This influenced artists for generations. And as an example, the Art Resource Guide brings up French painter Jean-Auguste Donique Angres. He used the same frontal pose for his portrait of Napoleon on his imperial throne in 1806. So this would have been done before, 26 years before Greenough doing Washington, right? So just to, again, exemplify the fact that, yeah, everybody knows this pose of Zeus, right? So here's Napoleon. Now, if you guys don't know a lot of your history, Napoleon, when he was rising through the ranks, helping the French Revolution, we got to get rid of all royalty, right? We got to get rid of kings and queens. We will have no kings and queens. They have a famous speech. So no kings and queens, all for one, one for all, liberté, fraternité. They wear the freedom caps and it's all a big thing. And then once he takes over, he says, yes, no more kings and queens. I'm emperor. There you go. So such a huge difference. We've gotten rid of all those evil aristocracy people, cut off their heads, and now we have the emperor of Europe. So this is Napoleon looking very non-regal like, correct? Yeah, okay. So this was his coronation as emperor, and so Angres commemorated it in painting. Napoleon embraced the title and godlike status of emperor. Remember that Washington rejected any suggestion of monarchical power. They asked him to come back after 2 terms as president. He said, no, it's time for me to leave, right? So godlike, and yet we have George Washington, who doesn't want to be depicted godlike, but Greenough depicts him godlike. Well, more modeling here. So we're going to come back to Greenough's, but we have to go to what else does Greenough use besides Zeus and besides perhaps the painting that Angres did of Napoleon? What else is he using for reference material? Well, famous sculptor by the name of Jean-Antoine Houdon, his portrait of Washington. Now, it's interesting. they say portrait of Washington. Earlier this year, this summer, I talked about a portrait done in embroidery. Well, this is a portrait done in sculpture. It's very easy to get confused. Most people, when they hear the term portrait, they think, oh, it's a painting. But portrait does not necessitate the medium of painting. It could be embroidery, it could be statuary. You could have a portrait, a photography portrait, right? That's more, they didn't have photos back then. That was around 1850s, 60s where it started getting. But so portraits don't have to be paintings. That's all I want to say. So Houdon's portrait of Washington here, it's a life-size sculpture. So it's not 41 feet tall. It's 5'10" or 6'10". I think Washington was 6'2" or 6'3". He was one of our taller presidents. Anyway, life-size sculpture commissioned for the rotunda of not the U.S. Capitol building, but the Virginia State Capitol in Richmond, Virginia, designed by Thomas Jefferson. Now, not the statue designed by Houdon. Virginia State Capitol building in Richmond, designed by Thomas Jefferson. In fact, he designed it in Monticello in his study there. Houdon blended elements of neoclassicism with realism. He depicted Washington as the gentleman farmer. He has what we refer to as a contrapposto. It says my meeting will end in 10 minutes because I don't have Zoom Pro. So when my meeting ends in 10 minutes, I will have to send you another link to another meeting. I did not, I don't want to update to Zoom Pro right now. Okay, so we're going to go for another, let's see, what time is it exactly? It is 4:28. So 4:35 to give us a couple minutes leeway here. I'll cut out. And that's funny. I purposely was using my school account thinking I had Zoom Pro, but maybe I've been cut off because I'm no longer working. Anyway, let's get back to here. Houdon depicted Washington as a gentleman farmer with a contrapposto pose. This is another one of those words. One of the legs, in this case, his right leg, which is on our left looking at them. His right leg is stiff, going straight down on the ground. His left leg is slightly bent. When you do that, when you stand in this contrapposto fashion, it makes one leg stiff and the other one slightly relaxed, and you wind up bending your torso in an S shape. And this starts with ancient Greek statuary. You can read about it in section 1 of the art resource guide, and it's to give statuary more realistic. You don't stand with two stiff legs. A lot of old Egyptian sculptures, they're very, very stiff. This is more naturalistic pose, one stiff leg, one slightly bent with your weight shifted to one side. And again, you can see him his body is bending, kind of curved like this, because this leg is stiff and this leg is bent. So this is contrapposto pose. Sword hanging unused by his side, right here. His gaze lifted towards the future. These are bundled rods here, known as fasces, and we've mentioned this before. In this case, it's 13 rods bundled together, representing the 13 colonies. The fasces symbolize power and authority in ancient Rome. He's updated it with 13 of the rods to, symbolize the colonies. Personalized facial features. Houdon actually went out to Mount Vernon, visited Washington, sculpted a life mask of his face, took very, very careful measurements of his body. And so this is very much what everybody says, that this is the best, most realistic face of Washington that exists. put Washington in contemporary dress. And this is huge because the one we're studying by Greenough does not do this. This was completed after the Revolutionary War, prior to the presidential inauguration.
But before the one that we looked at?
Yes, the one we're looking at was done in 1832 to commemorate Washington's 100-year anniversary of his birth.
This was while Washington was still alive.
No, Washington would be dead by this time because 1832, he'd have to be 100 years old. So I can't remember. I can't quite remember when Washington died, but yeah, so this one was done while Washington was still alive.
Okay.
The one, right, this one was done after he died.
Right, thank
Correct.
you.
Oh, that's fine. It's always good to ask questions. So where was I? I was not here. Okay, so you know what? I'm going to, since it's 4:32 and I just got to this slide and I'm not going to be able to finish this slide in the next 6 minutes. I'm going to see how this works if I need to send out a whole nother link or not. I'm going to stop the recording here. Pause recording and just